And good morning. How's everybody doing? Dr. Chris Roddenberry coming to you live from Willow Springs, North Carolina. Looks like we've got a couple of people in the audience. If you're here, go ahead and check in and say good morning. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming. Adjust my. There we go. Looks a little bit better. There we go. All right. So, welcome to class. We are on. I'm sorry, that is so annoying when that happens. Something's wrong with my internet and it cuts off. Every time it does, I get a message, so I'll talk back to you and explain to you what's going on. So don't worry, I know when my internet kicks out, and I'll wait so you don't miss anything. But I hope everybody's doing well. We are in week 9. We're on Thursday, so we're talking about chapter 9, and we're covering PowerPoint's 9B. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you'll remember, on yesterday we talked about motivations, and we talked about theories of motivation, maintaining homeostasis, needs-based theories. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And that was just to give you a general idea of the way in which we think about the motivations that people have. Remember, motivations in a sense of agency are what separate animals from computers. Computers have no sense of agency. They do what they're told. All right. Humans and animals, on the other hand, have motivations that drive them in different directions. You can think of emotions, which is what we're going to talk about today, as the directional markers that tell you that allow you to decide which direction you want to go in. So if motivation is the energy to get somewhere, you can think of emotions as the direction finder that allows you to decide what it is in your environment makes you feel good and what it is in your environment that doesn't make you feel good. So you can think of motivation and emotion as the essentially animalistic and human aspect that makes us different from computers. Okay, so let's talk briefly about, just to introduce emotions. There are not any real set definitions of what emotions are, depending upon what scientific angle you're coming from. You may have a different definition of them. But let's say that they are some sort of biological state that's characterized by neurological changes that happen in the brain. Okay, and these neurological changes affect the way we feel, our affect. They affect the way we think and the thoughts we have, our cognition, and they affect the way we behave. So emotions are a biological state characterized by a pattern of neurological activity that affects the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we behave. You might say, wouldn't it be better if we could live in a world where people never got sad, where there was no emotions? And I would actually say that that would be a difficult world to live in. Emotions are very important for the motivated animal and for the social animal. So here's the deal. Your emotions provide an evaluative interpretation of the environment for you. They allow you to decide which things in your environments are threats, which things in your environment are life sustaining and interesting to you, and which things are neutral to you. They allow you to tag objects, and combined with your memory, you can develop a pattern of behavior that allows you to avoid threats and things that aren't good for you and things you don't like, and go towards things you do like. So if you think about it, your emotions provide you sort of an evaluative roadmap, if you will. All right. The second thing is emotions work in the moral beast, so to speak. So your emotions, especially emotions about your behavior, provide you feedback for self-evaluation. Am I doing things that are right? Am I doing things that are wrong? If you feel a sense of shame because of something somebody said to you, that may cause you to reflect on your past behavior. On the other hand, if you feel a sense of pride for something you've done, that also provides a set of evaluative feedback. So, in a sense, not only do they allow you to evaluate your environment, but they allow you to evaluate yourself as well. And finally, when we talk about emotional displays a little bit later today, emotional displays serve to facilitate social interaction. Things do not always go smoothly. And so we can use emotions to accentuate or to smooth out those interactions. If I violate something on you, if I accidentally damage you or your property, I can use an emotional display of guilt to suggest to you that I did not mean to do it. You can then interpret that and we can avoid an aggressive interaction, right? And so emotional displays serve to facilitate social interaction by displays of pride, by displays of guilt, by displays of anger. We actually can affect the way other people interact with us and make things go a little bit more smoothly. Now, one interesting way of thinking about emotions is known as the circumplex model of emotions. What exactly is an emotion? If you're going to develop theories and test theories about emotion, it's important to define exactly what it is so that you can measure its dimensions or its qualities, if you will. And this guy named James Russell came up with a model of emotions. He said, let's think of emotions as being composed of affect, positivity or negativity towards a stimulus, and the amount of energy that stimulus causes in us. Does it make us very, very aroused and create a sympathetic nervous response, or does it create a parasympathetic nervous response and make us relaxed or not aroused? So he said, really, if you wanted to use a model to sort of define how all interactions were, he said you could think about all emotions as being composed of two qualities: a level of arousal and a level of positivity. And so you can see that happy and excited are positive and aroused emotions. You're upbeat, you're energetic, and you're positive. On the other hand, serene, relaxed, calm, those are positive emotions, but they are positive emotions that are very, very low in level of arousal. And you can do the same thing over on the negative side. So, one way, if we wanted to sort of build a model of emotions, we might look at this circumplex model of emotion. Now, what we're going to talk about a little bit later today, I've just got an introduction here and then we're going to move on, is a different model suggested by a fellow named Paul Ekman. And Paul Ekman uses what you might call a categorical model. He says if you look at people's emotions, what you're going to see is that there are 7 universal human emotions, 7 categories. So we don't need to, uh, goodness me, hold on just a second. Okay, never mind. I just missed a dentist appointment. Completely forgot that. Okay. Um, wow. Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. So that just messed me up. I just realized I missed a dentist appointment for my son. I forgot to tell him about it. Dadgummit. So now I'm feeling the emotion of guilt washing over me right now. It's providing me a little bit of evaluative feedback about my behavior. Ooh, I should feel a little bit bad, right? So Paul Ekman takes a different approach and says that we ought to think about people as having just 7 different unique, independent emotions, these basic emotions. And we're going to talk about those a little bit later. But first, let's get to sort of the basic parts of emotion. It's kind of weird. Most emotional theories, even ones in the 1800s, realized that there were two aspects of an emotion. One was a physiological response, and the other was a set of thoughts or cognitions, right? So when you get scared, the hairs on your arm will stand up. A chill will run out up your spine. You'll feel these physiological effects, right? These physical effects. And then at the same time, you're going to be having thoughts that are scary thoughts, right? And so if you think about it, every emotion contains sort of a set of thoughts or cognitions, if you will, and a physiological response. Now, to elucidate this belief in the longevity of this belief, let's talk about three models that came from the 19th century, even before we had any ability really to measure the physiology of emotional responses. Before psychology was even born, psychologists talked about how emotions worked. And the big debate was which came first. Was it the feeling or was it the thought? Now, according to James Lang, William James, remember the father of psychology, he had his theory suggested that people experienced physiological fear related responses, and that caused their mind to feel that emotion. So he argued that what we do is we interpret our physiological responses and they become emotions. So he would argue, if you look, we have the stimulus over here. The stimulus causes your heart to start beating fast. And then your brain interprets that heart beating fast and says, oh, Chris must be afraid. And so that's one way of thinking about the emotional response. On the other hand, a fellow named Walter Cannon, this guy actually coined the term fight or flight response. He's very famous in the study of physiological arousal. He suggested really that what happens is these two things happen at the same time. When you see the bear, okay, your heart's going to start beating at the same time that you have these cognitions about being afraid. So in James's model, emotion starts in your body. It's a pattern of physiological responses, and you learn to interpret those physiological responses. On the other hand, Cannon-Bard theory says that we have the same pattern of physiological responses, but at the same time, we have the same pattern of thoughts. So he argued that the cognitive label and the physiological response came at the same time. Now, here's a crazy theory that a fellow named Stanley Schachter said. His theory suggested this. He said, you know, if you think about it, physiological arousal is pretty vague. And a lot of things can make you aroused. So you can be aroused because you're angry. You can be aroused because you're happy. You can be aroused because you're scared. Really, it's not so much the physiological response. Instead, what people do is they have a physiological response and then they look in their environment and try to figure out which response they would be having based upon the situation. All right. And so Stanley Schachter said, really, there's no biological link between an emotion and a physiological response. In James Long's theory, the biological response pattern causes a cognitive pattern. In the Cannon-Bard theory, the behavioral pattern and the cognitive pattern occur at the same time, but they are tied because they are the same response to the same stimulus. Stanley Schachter said, instead, we have a physiological response, and then we look in our environment and we see what emotion we should be feeling in this situation. And he did this crazy misattribution of arousal experiment where he would bring people into a laboratory and he either would or would not give them an adrenaline pill. He didn't tell them what the adrenaline pill was. Actually, in the second experience, he would tell them what the adrenaline pill was, and or he wouldn't tell them what the adrenaline pill was, or he would. And in this area, the part of the situation, the experiment where he didn't tell them what the adrenaline pill was, what he would do is he would put them into a setting where they had a happy actor acting in front of them or an actor pretending to be angry. So he'd bring them in, give them the pill, and say, "Hey, I need you to fill out this paperwork." He'd put them in a room uh, with a CJ. Yeah. You heading to bed? No. You know what I forgot? What's that? You had a dentist appointment this morning. Oh, dang. Is there any way you could get there by 9:30? Yeah. All right, I love you. Thanks. Okay. Um, so they may look to accuse to encourage. Oh, he's going to be pissed at me. He's going to be so pissed. So people have a physiological response, and then they look to their environment. So in the one situation, the people wouldn't know that they were taking an adrenaline pill, and he would expose them to either a happy model or a sad model, and then he would give them an attitude survey. And what he found was the people who had taken the adrenaline pill and had been experienced to a happy model reported being very happy. The people who had taken the adrenaline pill and not known it, right, and then been exposed to the angry model reported their mood as being very angry. Now, with the other condition, he told the people what the adrenaline pill was going to do. And so these people attributed their emotion to the pill and didn't change their evaluation of their emotion because they already had a reason that their heart was beating fast. So they didn't get mad when they saw the mad model. They didn't get happy when they saw the happy model. So in a sense, what he suggests is that these two things are actually to a certain degree independent. You have a physiological response and you may or may not attach an emotional label to it. So you have this physiological response, the situation's right, you say, "Oh, I must be happy," and you have happy thoughts. On the other hand, you're having a physiological response and you're in a situation where you should be angry. What you're going to do is you're going to have the angry thoughts and decide that you're angry. But what I want you to take from this particular slide here is that all three of these theorists, whose work is pretty old, the 19th century William James, the 1920s Cannon-Bard's theories, and even Stanley Schachter's in the 60s, we didn't really have a lot of technology to back up what these people were saying, but they came upon the insight that emotion involves two things: a set of cognitions and a set of physiological responses, okay? And that these can affect your behavior. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this physiological model because it turns out they are right. All right. Now, emotions are evolutionarily determined. They have a value. Okay. They allow you, in a sense, to decouple your behavior from reflexes. You can now learn and associate emotions based on experience with things in your environment. If you didn't have emotions, you'd have to act on nothing but a set of reflexes set into your system. But learning allows you to adapt your behavior based upon experience. And so learning, if you will, or emotions are built into the system. And let's take a look here at how this system was built. Now, there are two parts of your brain that are very important for emotion. It's your cerebral cortex, your frontal lobe of your brain, and your amygdala down in your brain center. Now, if you remember, I suggested to you that all sensory experiences come through the thalamus. So you see sensory information coming through the thalamus right here. Now, here's the deal. This information is transmitted from your thalamus to the amygdala, and the frontal lobe of your brain at the same time. You recognize what the object is, boom, in the frontal lobe of your brain, and at the same time you have an emotional reaction to that object. Now, the link between the thalamus and the amygdala and your amygdala's response and its physiological response on your body happens super duper quick. We'll call this the fast path of emotion. This is the fast path. This is the automatic path. This is the instinctual path for emotion that we are born with as animals. Now, we have developed this frontal lobe as human beings, and this really big frontal lobe has allowed us to evaluate objects for their emotional impact. So not only does your amygdala light up, but that information is transferred to your frontal lobe, which evaluates the object more closely to make sure that you really are afraid of the object that you see, or you really do like the object that you see. All right. So the crazy thing is, you walk downstairs and you see a snake. Your amygdala says snakes are scary because that's been instinctually learned. Snakes are scary. But then your frontal lobe goes, oh, that's my pet snake, Harry, that I have. So, in a sense, your amygdala is going to want to have this quick emotional response that's sort of more, if you will, reflexive, more innate, more thoughtless. And then your frontal lobe is going to evaluate these objects, but it's going to take your frontal lobe just a little more time to evaluate these objects. Now, once it does, it's going to send information down to your amygdala to change the level of activation of your amygdala. So your frontal lobe can control your emotional response. The way you think can control your emotional response. Now, I can give you some evidence for that. I don't know if you folks have ever seen a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, but they are crybabies. They cry at everything. Infants cry at everything. They're either happy or they're crying, and you can't reason with them and cause them to stop crying. This is because the myelination path that goes to their frontal lobe that connects down to their amygdala hasn't myelinated. They haven't built up those brain connections between their frontal lobe and their amygdala yet. And what happens over the first 5 to 6 years of life is the areas of your frontal lobe begin to myelinate, and the brain pathways that connect the amygdala to the cortex become more refined and complex and mature. And that allows your frontal lobe to control your emotional responses. And that's why the things that made you cry as a 2-year-old don't make you cry as a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old. It's because we have these two parts of our brain that are important for the emotion. Yeah, yep, absolutely. And one of the things that we do know is that in order to develop impulse control and emotional control, those connections need to be stimulated during a critical period. Just like there's a critical period for language, and there's a critical period for vision, and there's a critical period for literally every part of brain development that you have. There's a critical period for developing the connection between this frontal lobe and this amygdala. There's a critical period for developing emotional control. And so when your child is 2 and 3 and 4, one of the things that you need to really do as a good parent is to help your child learn to identify their emotions, to know what they're feeling, and how to control those emotions, how to deal positively with those emotions. A lot of parents just tell their kids not to have the emotions. Quit crying, or don't worry about that, or that shouldn't bother you. This is what we call emotionally dismissing. Instead, what you need to be doing is training your child to recognize the emotions that they're feeling and learning strategies for controlling those emotions and responding properly. Emotional control is a very important part of adult functioning. And sometimes when people don't 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 connect these two parts of the brain, what you get is an out of control adult. Quick note. If you look down here at this skull right here, this was a fellow named Phineas Gage. He had an accident at work. He was a railroad worker back in the late 1900s. There was an explosion at work, and this steel rod, you can see the steel rod here. This is just a picture of what it could have looked like. A steel rod was blown up through his cheek and went completely out of his head. This rod went 15 feet up in the air. And the crazy thing is, this guy never lost consciousness. He actually fell over, it knocked him down and stunned him for a few minutes. He went to the doctors, and after about 4 or 5 days, this guy was actually able to get up out of bed and walk around and seemed completely normal by most accounts. He could walk, he could talk, he could ride a bike, he could do everything he'd done before. The only thing that had happened was his emotional control had gone away. Suddenly, he couldn't control his emotions. He wanted to fight everybody. He got angry. He couldn't get up and go to work. He had absolutely no control over he had no inhibition or emotional control. Now, what he destroyed was this prefrontal cortex right here in his brain. The accident had damaged that part of his brain, which is responsible for emotional control. And so he became more of what you might call an amygdala responder, if you will. And so emotions require the frontal lobe and the amygdala, true emotional control. Now, this guy named Paul Ekman had this really cool theory, and he wondered how universal faces were. Okay, so what he would do is he would take pictures of people here in America making faces and of different emotions, and then he would take these pictures and carry them to crazy parts of the world where they'd never met white people before, where they'd never met Western culture before. And he went into these indigenous cultures and he asked them to try to recognize the emotions on these faces. And what he found, he had people make lots of different emotions, and then he took these emotions out to different parts of the world. And then he had people in different parts of the world make these emotions and brought them back to the United States. And what he found was that there appeared to be six, actually seven. I've got the picture right here. Sorry, only six. I couldn't find one with the seventh. But there appear to be seven facial expressions that are universally recognized. Now, think about this, universally recognized. If something is universal, then it is free of culture, then it is somehow built into the system, right? If it's universal, for some reason it has some sort of evolutionary value. It has some sort of biological programming in it that it doesn't matter where you go, you still use the same facial expression. Think about it. No matter where people go in the world, people walk about the same, right? No matter where you go, people will eat with about the same kinds of hand movements. Wherever you go, people will use the same emotions to communicate emotional states, the same physiological responses to communicate emotional states, right? And these seven facial expressions appear to be anger, fear, disgust, happiness, sadness, surprise, and contempt. Can anybody tell me which one is not here? Which one? Or Angelina, since you're my lone student here, can you tell me which one of these? Okay, up in the top left corner, which emotion is that? The female with the straight blonde hair, top left. What emotion is that? That's what we would call, she's angry. She's angry. She's angry. Okay. The guy beside her in the top row middle. Yeah, see, notice her brows have come way down. Okay. So she's angry because the brows have come down and the face is tight and the lips are down. Okay. The gentleman beside her, the gentleman beside her is probably, he is afraid. He is afraid as well. You're actually, it's funny you should mention that. Disgust is the only one I don't think is, excuse me, disgust is the one beside her. If you see, his brows are up, his mouth is open, and his eyes are open. That's okay. He's got fear. The lady beside him, you'll notice her nose is wrinkled and her lips are going down like she's smelling something stinky. That's disgust. Now, the girl, the lady in the, you're right, maybe, you know, it's interesting you should mention that. You know what? Damage to the amygdala and emotional centers can actually make it hard for people to interpret emotions. That's a that's a great point. So it can damage the ability to interpret emotions as much as it can control the ability to manage your own emotions. And if you think about it, one of the features of autism is difficulty reading and interpreting other people's emotional expressions. And so you can, they don't have a specific explanation of how and why this biological mechanism, this pathway is damaged, but you can definitely believe that somehow or another the functioning between the amygdala and the frontal lobe is not working as planned in people with autism. So the girl on the bottom left is surprised. Okay. She's different from the guy who's afraid. Both of them have eyes open, but you'll notice that his eyebrows are a little bit lower and his mouth is a little bit lower. So they're both seeing something that's shocking. He's seeing something that's shocking and potentially dangerous, so he's afraid. She's seeing something that's shocking and probably funny. The guy below her in the bottom center, of course, is smiling. And you'll notice the lady right here, she's got the downturned lips, but the eyes are not knitted, so she's not angry. Her eyebrows are up, so she's sad. The only one you don't see here is contempt, which contempt is typically when you smile halfway and you kind of you put on sort of a half smile and a half frown, and that's contempt. Now, what he found was that you could find these emotions when people were experiencing these emotions. These are the exact facial expressions that they made, and you can recognize these universally. So instead of having this dimensional model with arousal and positivity, he just said there are 7 cups, 7 basic patterns of facial expressions that are somehow biologically related to the emotions that we feel. So this goes all the way back to the Henry James and Cannon-Bard talking about the biological connection between the physical experience and the mental experience, right? Now, what he did find is that there are different display rules that are culturally determined. So when we are angry, everyone over the world shows it the same exact way. The only thing is, cultures determine whether or not it is acceptable to express an emotion in that given setting, and these are known as display rules. So when you are getting screamed at or reprimanded by your boss here in America, okay, you are supposed to look a little bit sad. It is okay to look a little bit sad. It is okay to look a little bit mad. It's okay not to smile when you're getting reprimanded. However, I've been told in some Eastern cultures over in Asia that when your boss is reprimanding you, it's appropriate to smile. So you can't show that you are sad inside. So you may have the emotion, but you can't show it at that given time. So what he argued was that if you think about emotions, one way of thinking about emotions is don't worry about dimensions, etc., etc. Just know that there are 7 universal emotions, 7 patterns of facial expressions that people have. These patterns are universal, they're worldwide. The only difference is how people choose, when people choose to show their true emotions. And he said, you know, you can think about some of these more complex emotions, guilt, pride, these other emotions. They're just blends of these primary emotions, and they may vary a little bit from culture to culture. And so he didn't find the universality of these other emotions, but he did find that you can find these 7 basic emotions represented the same way everywhere in the world. Now, he argued that these emotions are baked into the system. They're automatic, autonomic, if you will, and biological. And so, one of the things that he found was that sometimes these automatic, autonomic responses would leak out when people are trying to be deceptive. So, I'm sure all of you have had situations where you've pretended to say something you didn't believe, or you pretended to like something that you didn't like, or you've just basically tried to fake your emotions. Now, if you remember, we suggested to you that emotions are composed of 2 parts: an amygdala that operates super duper quick and gives a physiological response, and then our frontal lobe, which acts a little bit slower. Now, the weird thing is in emotions, when we're trying to fake our faked emotions, since they come from the frontal lobe, always move just a little bit slower than our true amygdala emotions. And so, what this guy, Paul Ekman, found was that you could reliably predict when people are lying about things by learning how to look at the emotional slippage, he would call it, that occurs when people are lying. And so he identified these things he called micro expressions: innate, quick, emotional response registered in the face that tells you how someone really feels when they're trying to hide an emotion. So somebody may say, "Hey, Chris, Angelina's here," and I go, now that's super quick. I did that really, really slowly. The micro expressions he's looking at. But I turned, I go, see, my first little bitty emotion was more of disgust. So I turn around and I go, and I turn. Exactly. Now, I did that really super duper slow. I mean, the micro expressions that he finds are far quicker and a little more subtle, and he shows them in real slow time. And if you practice for a while, you can get good at seeing these micro expressions, but they last for less than a quarter of a second, and they come out when people are trying to be disingenuous. And what he argues is it's because we have these basic emotions baked into our autonomic system, these facial expressions. And most of the time, when we're telling the truth, our frontal lobe says the same thing that our amygdala does, so our emotion stays the same. But when we're trying to disguise our emotions, the true one will always come out first in a micro expression. Now, let's talk briefly about emotional development. You can and you should help your child control their emotions. Emotional control does not develop in a vacuum, okay? Just like any other human neurologically determined device, determined behavior and ability, it must be trained through experience, okay? So you've got to stimulate the brain pathway during the critical period, right? So he said that there's nature, There's this predetermined developing and unfolding of your abilities and myelination, but then that requires that different parts of the brain be stimulated. One of the things that you need to do as a parent with your 2 year old, your 1 and 2 year old, is you need to start helping them learn how to control their emotional responses. Now, you don't do that by getting angry at them, you don't do that by threatening to punish them. What you have to do is kind of help them understand and develop habits to change their emotions. Now, how do we as adults change our emotions? Well, we learn how to reappraise things, we learn how to make things funny, and we learn how to distract ourselves. When something bad happens to me, my car breaks down, okay, I can have a really bad emotional response. But what I do as an adult is I reappraise it. Well, you know what? At least I had some overtime money to fix the car with. At least I can borrow my father's car. At least I'm an online worker and I don't need a car this week. I can reappraise that situation. That's an adult ability to control one's emotion, okay? We don't think about it, but that's a strategy that you commonly use to change your emotions, right? Or we can use humor. Sometimes something bad happens and you just say, well, you have to laugh at it. It's just so bad. If I didn't laugh, I would cry. We learn how to find the tragedies in life a little to see the humor in the bad things that happen to us. I can't believe it. Here we go again. You will laugh, right? Now, again, this is a strategy that you've learned to distract yourself away from the thing that really makes you angry. And then sometimes we learn how to distract ourselves. Maybe my partner is bothering me. Maybe the car is bothering me because it broke down. Well, what I'll do is I'll watch some TV. I'll watch some football. I'll read a book. I'll listen to some music. I will distract myself from something that bothers me. Here's the thing. These are adult habits and strategies that we use to engage our frontal lobe with our amygdala. These are sort of learned strategies. Angelina, what you need to do, what we need to do as parents of 2 and 3 and 4 year olds is we need to teach them how to do these strategies. Okay. This is just like learning how to memorize lists and how to study for tests. This is something you can help your child improve on. You help them regulate their emotions, the ability to control your emotions. It is a key to adult success. Okay, it is a key to adult success. Now, the way we do this, as I suggested, is by being an emotional coach, not an emotionally dismissive parent, but an emotional coach. A lot of parents, especially in the South, where I grew up in the 70s and even before me in the 1960s, what we did was, especially for boys, is we used the emotional dismissing approach, the emotional dismissing approach. Boy, don't you cry. I'll give you something to cry about. Boys don't cry. That's nothing to cry about. Why are you crying? Don't get mad. Control yourself. And parents would just tell you to stop whatever emotion you were feeling. Now, that's one way to get compliance in the short term, or at least get the kid to hide the feeling a little bit. But that's being an emotional dismissing parent. What you're doing is you're teaching your child how not to recognize emotions, how to see emotions as something not to be dealt with. Um, Basically, you're handicapping your child in dealing with the things that are going to bother them later in life. Instead, what they suggest you do is to help your child learn how to work through their emotions. So your kid starts throwing a tantrum. Okay, it doesn't matter what you feel, this is what's going to happen. I'm sorry. Now, having done that, you can then try to reappraise the child. Well, you know what? Yeah, we're done playing toys, but we can play with toys tomorrow. It's okay. We can play with toys tomorrow. Or you could tell your child a joke. So they're crying when it's time to quit playing with the toys. You could tell them we'll play with the toys tomorrow. You could tell them a funny joke. You could sing a silly song, or you could say, "Hey, we're not playing toys, but we're going to the store where we're going to have fun and play with the whatevers or see the whatevers." You could distract your kid. And so what you're doing when you do these things is you label the emotion. I know you're feeling sad. I know you're feeling angry. I know you're scared. Label the emotion because you're helping the child learn how to recognize these feelings as their emotions, and then offer them a strategy to help get over the emotion. Now, don't give in to your child. That's not emotional regulation. That's spoiling. But help your child learn how to deal with the disappointments, the fears, and the angers that they are having. I'm not saying spoil your child. As soon as I start saying this, these Southern parents out there going, "Oh, I'm not going to spoil my kid. He's just going to learn how to deal with it." Exactly. You're right. He's going to learn how to deal with it, but you need to help him learn how to deal with it by teaching them these emotional regulation strategies. And it's easy to do with childhood disappointments because childhood disappointments are so simple. I want to keep playing with the toys. I like that food. He's my favorite friend. I don't want to go home for the night. I don't want to go to bed. I don't want to stop watching TV. These are simple disappointments. These are great grounds for you to practice these skills. When your child becomes 14, 15, and 16, the disappointments, the angers, the fears are going to become far more complicated, and it's going to be more difficult to train these reappraisal strategies in at that point. So, what you want to do is you want to become an emotional coaching parent. Don't protect your kid from disappointments and bad emotions, but help them identify and learn how to control these emotions. If as a child you didn't get proper emotional coaching, proper stimulation needed during the critical period to develop the pathway, what as an adult can you do to help yourself? You know, A, you can become aware of it. Uh, B, you can use sort of a cognitive behavioral strategy to train it. It's harder. I'm not saying it's not like language where if you don't learn it when you're 2, you're never ever going to be able to learn it. But what I'm saying is a lot of the heavy work can be done at the 2 to 3 age. But one of the things that you probably, if you went into a cognitive behavioral therapist, what they would do is they would sit down in their office, and the first thing they would ask you to do is to list the events that typically cause you to have emotional problems. And you would list all 10 or 15 events that happen during your typical day that piss you off, right? You would then go through and in the calm of the office, and your cognitive behavioral therapist would say, okay, what do you typically do when somebody cuts you off in traffic? You would say, oh, I typically start screaming and yelling and blowing up, blah, blah, blah. This is my desire, my typical behavior. In the comfort of the office and when you're relaxed, you would talk with the doctor about, well, how could you reappraise that situation? How could you find humor? And you would develop in the comfort of that doctor's office this new strategy, okay? Because thinking and emotions are a habit. And so, what you would do is you would go through in the comfort of the office when you're relaxed, you would go through the 10 trigger events that cause you to lose your emotional control, and you would discuss with your doctor new strategies that you were going to use in those situations, right? Now, the key is then for you to know these 10 situations and to recognize when you are in them. So, somebody cuts you off in traffic. You're typically going to go to your first emotional negative response. If you've been to cognitive behavioral therapy and you're thinking about therapy, you stop, recognize this as an event, and then put that reappraised emotional statement into your mind, and that helps calm you in that situation. And so then over a period of time, what you try to do is get in the habit of using these regulation strategies. Now, what you're doing to your 2-year-old child is you're training these habits of thinking into them. Okay? And it's much easier to train a new habit rather than to replace a bad habit. You know that. And so the reason it's so important at 2 and 3 years old is your child doesn't have a habit of responding with patterns of emotional responses. What you do at 2 and 3 years old is train them using the correct habits, the habits that lead to success. All right. Now, what that means is you can correct bad habits as an adult, Angelina. You just have to go through the process like any other habit you try to break. You have to make it intentional for a while. So, find out if there are 4 things that you do that are bad emotional responses. Sit down, write them down on a piece of paper, write out what you typically do, write a more positive response based on either reappraisal, humor, distraction, memorize that response, and then whenever you hit the trigger event, if you get good at identifying the trigger, hey, this is one of my situations, what do I typically do? How am I going to respond this time? And what you can do is you can train yourself to be a little bit more emotionally controlled. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, it's very, very hard. People who are, as adults, who are emotionally out of control are going to have a lot of difficulties during their life. Um, and it's hard, hard, hard to change your style of emotional functioning. But those are great questions. All right. So that's all I had to say today, Angelina. We are at 9:50. I want to thank you for coming today, as always, and you were great in webinar last night. And so have a good weekend. I know you're going to do the extra credit, Angelina. And then homework number 9 is due tomorrow night by 11:59 p.m. If you have any questions, send me a text or an email and I can get back with you anytime. I know you're doing the extra credit. That's what I like about you, my type A personality, Angelina Yang. We're going to test that later on this semester with the personality test. I'm going to find out for sure. And then I'll have documented proof about who you are, Angelina. All right, take care. Have a great day, and I will see you next week. Bye.